Hello, and welcome back to Mr. Mescher's YouTube channel. I wanted to continue the series I made about book reviews and introductions to books, and the next book on the list was The Good Neighbor. This is about Fred Rodgers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It's written by Maxwell King, and the book is a biography of the life and the work of Fred Rodgers. The book is pretty interesting, and I feel like I learned a lot from it, and while I might not necessarily recommend that you check this book out, I certainly recommend that you look a little more into Fred Rodgers, and maybe my introduction and information I give about him will be enough to spark your interest. One of the important things to look into when reading a biography is what kind of credentials does the author have about the person they're writing about. And Maxwell King leads the nonprofit Pittsburgh Foundation, which was associated with Fred Rodgers before he died and after he died. He is a very certified person, and he dug very deep into Fred Rodgers' life. For those of you who do not know who Fred Rodgers is, he is a television icon who was often broadcast on PBS. He made television just in such an iconic way, in such a unique atmosphere, that he really attracted the hearts of many children. For those of you who don't know who Mr. Rodgers is, he was a very deep individual. He was love thy neighbor to a completely new level. He listened to children, he spoke to them softly, and he was the center of attention. He would let other obligations melt away as he listened to their problems and as he explained the world to them. What people don't know about Fred Rodgers is that he grew up in quite the life of luxury. He was practically rich. His parents lived in a mansion, he had a chauffeur and a cook. He certainly lived in the lap of luxury, and he really benefited from a lot of these aspects about his life. But that doesn't mean that he didn't go through any struggles. Fred Rodgers was bullied as a child. He had asthma, and he was a bit chubby. So he was often ridiculed to the point where the money actually negatively impacted him. People seemed to think maybe he was too stuck up, or they just didn't want to associate with him. One of the quotes I found to be most impactful in the book describing him was that his mother always told him, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people helping." I thought this quote was really interesting, and it really kind of described who he was. He was in public broadcasting through a lot of turmoil in the United States. Several wars, the evolving technological race, and even the race to the moon, an increase in divorces, and this is just the beginning of it. Fred Rodgers really answered children's questions and applied them in a way so that they could understand them and feel comfort and at peace with them. Most of his shows were recorded out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and his first show, The Children's Corner, eventually led to the creation of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and was a huge stepping stone and shared a lot of similarities with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Something Rodgers did a lot was he invited a diverse amount of guests onto his show. Some of the guests included an African-American musician and a shop owner who would occasionally teach him Spanish words and phrases. Mr. Rogers was a vegetarian, and the reason for this was he did not want to eat anything that had a mother. In a lot of ways, Mr. Rogers was ahead of his time. He was practically a counselor or a psychologist for the children that watched the show. He listened, and he gave helpful advice. He gave helpful life advice to young children who may have been struggling. He would talk about the perils of a divorce that maybe a child's parents was going through. He essentially made an entire neighborhood that included several different people. It most likely would be akin to Sesame Street today, but he was a one-man show, and he was the star of it. And he was just such an incredible person, and he was really able to persuade children to watch his show, and the children who watched his show felt respected and protected. When you compare Mr. Rogers to the current entertainers such as the Kardashians or even the general attitudes that the United States has, it doesn't seem that we have a very heavy emphasis on caring. We don't have a very heavy emphasis on listening to others. Mr. Rogers embodied this a lot, and he was a strong advocate for treating children with respect and ensuring that we did not try to dupe them. He didn't allow advertisements on his show. He wouldn't allow products to be made of his toys. Mr. Rogers could have become a multimillionaire based on his television shows, but instead he stuck to his roots and tried his best to teach children without manipulating them. Modern day entertainment often tries to take advantage of children. We've seen this in the cereal has become a practical toy factory. Fast food restaurants try to take advantage of children by pulling their parents in. Mr. Rodgers didn't try to do that, and that's what really set him apart from the rest of the competition. Fred Rodgers was ultimately a pure and whole person who, compared to the current times and even the past times where he was broadcast in, he was one of a kind. I would encourage you to look more into Fred Rodgers. While I thought The Good Neighbor was a good novel, it was a bit dry at times, and there were sections that I feel if you're a Fred Rodgers enthusiast, you would love them, but if you're not, perhaps it wasn't the strongest choice to read. Regardless, I do think that Fred Rodgers was a phenomenal person, and I hope that this video helped you understand that and maybe will prompt you to do a little research of your own. For this book, I'm not going to personally recommend it because I don't think it's necessary for you to read the entire biography Maxwell King wrote in order to understand the ideas and the ideologies behind Fred Rodgers, but I would certainly recommend that you look into him and find out more about him yourself. For the next book on the list, we have Always the Fat Kid, written by Jacob Warren and Brian Smalley, and this novel is about the effects that childhood obesity has on adults and how children with obesity deal with the effects that it has on their childhood and even going into adulthood. I'm really looking forward to read this, and while maybe this isn't a novel you would particularly look forward to, I think this is a very important story, and I think it's an important step in changing the obesity crisis in the United States. So look out for that video. I hope this video helped you out, and I hope that you take an opportunity to look into Fred Rodgers. He's often compared in a trilogy style to Steve Irwin and Bob Ross in terms of wholesomeness. Thank you for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.